On July 22, 1879, somewhere between the Capitan Mountains and the dusty town of Lincoln, New Mexico, a 19-year-old drifter named Billy, already fleeing the law for months, stumbled onto something so horrifying that he would remember it until his final breath. When Billy was captured the following year, he shared what happened with Deputy Sheriff Romero, and Romero had one of his men write down every detail. Their investigation later confirmed the nightmare Billy described, leaving the men absolutely stunned. Among those who heard the account firsthand, it came to be known as the Carnage of Capitan. Billy explained that he had been drifting since the previous June, moving from place to place. He eventually decided to head toward the Capitan Mountains, planning to hide out for a while and try his luck hunting elk high in the ridges where fewer people roamed. Traveling mid-morning up a narrow trail, he spotted something odd far below. In a deep gulch, scraps of clothing scattered across the rocks. He pulled his horse to a stop, unsure whether it was worth climbing down. But the longer he stared, the more fabric and belongings he noticed. Hungry, low on supplies, and badly needing water, he finally decided to ride down into the gulch. He figured a stream was likely at the bottom, and maybe he'd find leftover food or gear. The descent took longer than he expected, but when he reached the floor of the gulch, he noticed an overturned wagon partly hidden behind a large tree, with scattered belongings lying everywhere. Thinking he had found an abandoned settler wagon, he approached slowly, pistol drawn, careful, alert. He was a wanted man, and trouble could be hiding anywhere. But when he got close enough to see behind the wagon, what he found nearly froze him solid. As Billy stepped close enough to peer behind the overturned wagon, his breath caught in his throat. Lying on the ground were the naked bodies of 12 people, men, women, and children, lined up in a perfectly straight row as if someone had placed them there with care. What sickened him even more were the perfectly round holes carved through their bodies, each the size of a glass jar. Some had holes straight through their faces, leaving ghastly openings where the insides of their heads should have been. The sight was so unnatural that Billy froze, unable to understand what could make wounds so clean and precise. He sat on his horse for a long moment, trying to gather his thoughts. Cannon fire crossed his mind, but he had seen cannon wounds before, and they were nothing like this. These holes were too symmetrical, too exact, impossible to be caused by any weapon he knew. Finally, forcing himself to move, he slid off his saddle. Immediately, a wave of fear washed over him. Sitting on a horse elevated your sense of control. Touching the ground made him feel exposed. After checking the surroundings carefully, he moved toward the body. The stench of decay hit him so hard he doubled over and vomited. Flies and maggots filled the open wounds. These people had been dead for days, maybe longer. Covering his nose and mouth with his handkerchief, he crouched beside one of the corpses, examining the circular wounds again. There was simply no explanation he could imagine. Suddenly, every hair on his neck stood up. The overwhelming primal feeling of being watched washed over him. He spun around, pistol up, and just as he turned, he caught a glimpse of something large slipping behind the trees with shocking speed. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't any man he knew. Terrified, he fired a shot toward the movement, the sound echoing through the gulch as his trembling hand struggled to stay steady. The gunshot rang out through the gulch, echoing off the trees. But whatever Billy had seen vanished as quickly as it appeared. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. Trying to steady himself, he shouted, "Who's there? Show yourself." But his voice trembled, betraying the fear clawing at his insides. He tried to sound tough, but deep down he felt as helpless as a frightened kid. Billy knew he needed supplies, and the overturned wagon might hold something useful. But every step he took backward toward it felt like a step closer to danger. Keeping his pistol raised, he checked the wagon. Inside, he found dried food, blankets, and other essentials scattered about. Working quickly, he stuffed whatever he could into his saddlebags, never taking his eyes off the tree line. Once mounted on his horse, he headed down into the gulch toward the stream. He desperately needed water, and for a moment he hoped the worst was behind him. But when he reached the stream, his stomach tightened. The rocks beside the water were coated in fresh blood, still dark and wet. Something terrible had happened there not long before he arrived. Bushes rustled behind him. Billy froze. Before he could turn, a soft, shaky voice whispered, "Mr. Help me." His instincts fired and he spun around with his pistol drawn, hands shaking violently. The thick bushes in front of him began to move, something pushing through them slowly, deliberately. Billy cocked the hammer back, ready for whatever might burst through. But right at the edge of the brush, the movement suddenly stopped. Silence then. Without warning, the unseen figure turned and sprinted back the way it came. The sound was so abrupt Billy nearly pulled the trigger again. His mind raced. People don't run from help. And animals don't speak. Whatever it was watching him, and it wasn't done. Billy stood frozen by the stream, pistol gripped tight, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. That voice, too soft to be a grown man, too clear to be an animal, echoed in his mind. Every instinct screamed at him to leave immediately, but he needed water if he planned on surviving the mountains. So, with every muscle tense, he holstered his pistol just long enough to fill his canteen, never once taking his eyes off the thick brush. He knew predators strike when their prey is distracted, and right now he felt like easy pickings. After filling his canteen, he climbed back onto his horse and turned toward higher ground. Up the hill, the trees thinned, giving him a wider view. If anything wanted to sneak up on him, it'd have a harder time doing it there. The rest of the day passed quietly, but the fear stayed with him like a shadow he couldn't shake. He didn't relax until several hours later, when he'd finally put enough distance between himself and that cursed gulch. At the base of a small cliff he made camp. Nothing could approach from behind, and that gave him at least a little comfort. Although he rarely risked a fire being wanted meant staying hidden, he needed to eat. So he lit a small one and cooked a bit of the dried food he'd taken from the wagon. Exhaustion hit him hard, and soon he drifted into a deep sleep. But peace didn't last. In the dream that followed, he was back in the gulch, lying on those blood-soaked rocks. His horse stood over him, breathing heavily against his face. The warmth of that breath felt too real, too close. And when he opened his eyes, he realized it was real. Something was standing over him. Something that wasn't his horse. Billy's eyes snapped open, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. A tall, dark shape hovered inches from his face, its outline barely visible against the faint starlight. Whatever it was, it stood still, too silent, and far too close. His horse was tied nearly 20 feet away. There was no mistaking that this thing wasn't her. Fighting panic, Billy slowly reached for the pistol on his hip, but the second his fingers touched the grip, the figure shot away in total silence, so fast and unnatural it made his blood run cold. No footsteps, no branches snapping, no sound at all. It vanished as if the darkness had swallowed it whole. Billy scrambled to his feet, spinning in circles with his pistol raised, trying to catch sight of anything moving. But the forest remained silent except for his own ragged breathing. His horse hadn't made a single noise, confirming what he already knew. Whatever had been breathing inches from his face wasn't anything she had sensed or recognized. Shaking violently, he piled every piece of wood he could find onto the fire, building it high and bright. He didn't care who might see it. He just knew one thing: he wasn't letting the fire die. Not after that. He sat with his back against the cliff wall, staring into the flames until morning, terrified to close his eyes again. When dawn finally came, he allowed himself only a short nap, waking with a pounding headache and the weight of fear heavy in his chest. He needed to keep moving. After cooking a quick breakfast, he debated heading back toward town, but the thought of being arrested and hung kept him from turning around. So he pressed on toward the elk grounds, praying that whatever had visited him in the night wouldn't follow. But deep down, he feared it already had. Billy rode through the mountains for hours, nerves stretched tight as a wire. Every rustle in the brush made him grip his reins harder. But when he finally reached the crest of a hill and spotted a small green valley below live with a grazing herd of elk, his fear faded just enough for instinct to take over. Food meant survival, and right now he needed that more than anything. He tied his horse to a tree, grabbed his rifle, and stalked through the timber until he got close enough to drop a large bull elk. The shot was clean, and the animal fell without much struggle. For the rest of the day he worked non-stop, cutting meat, packing it, and hanging what he could to dry. Elk were massive, and the amount of meat gave him hope he could stay in the mountains a while, far from the law, and hopefully far from whatever haunted him. He made camp nearby and slept better than he had in days, almost forgetting the horror of the gulch. The next morning, he woke thirsty and hiked to a nearby river to fill his water. But when he returned toward camp, a cold unease settled over him again. He couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. His horse stood calmly, but Billy's instincts clawed at him. All day he salted the meat, pausing at every snapped twig, every whisper of wind through the leaves. When night fell, he built a big fire again, determined to keep the darkness away. Exhaustion finally pulled him into sleep, until a soft voice behind him whispered, "Mister, help me." Before he could turn, something grabbed the back of his shirt and hurled him through the air. He slammed into a pine tree, crashing through branches as he fell. Pain shot through his body as he lay stunned on the ground, while behind him, his horse's screams tore through the night. Screams no normal animal should ever make.